No audio.
Hello, do you hear me?
Now I can, yes.
I unmuted. I did
Yeah.
one thing right so far. Eileen's here.
Eileen's here.
Hi, Eileen.
Eileen, you're muted.
This is exciting. Do we have, is Tom going to be part of this? Do you know?
Yes.
Okay.
I need to figure out how to lower my volume. Whew.
Hi, baby. Hi.
Come on in, sweetie.
Hi, baby. You got it?
Yes, we've got Eileen. Come say hi.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi. I'm going to go to my computer so I don't mess with this man, but I just wanted to make sure he was all set up.
Good.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
did
there's
see
Tom.
you all. Welcome back home, Eileen.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is Mickey.
Hi, me. Come here, me.
I'm going to look through. Tom sent,
Tom's right here.
oh, good. Tom sent, all right.
And
all
you're
right.
muted. You're muted, Tom.
Yep. Hello.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
How's everybody?
Good.
Okay.
Is this too loud for everyone? I don't know.
No, it's not too loud.
Okay.
No, it's okay.
So we need peanut butter. Rebecca.
Yeah, I have to promote her to a panelist. There we go.
Oh, boy. You stay. You stay with your daddy.
There she is.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was here like, when am I going to appear?
And does anyone know, I surely don't, how we would know that there are other people attending?
Yes, we have Micah is attending.
Great.
That's it so far.
So you know that when people come in,
You can click on your participants. Maybe I only can see that, but there's a participants at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I can go into it, but I don't see any. I just see the panel list, and oh,
And
I've
then
got.
there's a tab for
Yeah.
attendees, and there's 2 attendees now,
Yep.
and they can hear what we're saying. So greetings.
do you have access to their names
Yes.
on the screen so that you could introduce them?
Depends how many there are coming in. If they're just a few, well, then I think so. But I wouldn't take the time if there are quite a few.
I agree. Thing is, we can't introduce anybody because we don't get a name. Only, let's look.
Hello, Pat, Robbie.
Oh, good.
Hello, Micah. Hello, Jim Colville, maybe? It's
Mary, thank you for your work at the board and being our host.
you're welcome. Ted has joined us. Now, attendees, just so you know, you will not be able to speak, but if you have a question, you can send in a question, the Q&A down below. Although we will not, we will just be doing a couple questions at the end that our panelists will be taking care of.
This is Cooper. I also want to welcome all of you and all of us to this third week of the month forum, and thank Eileen for her brainstorm and work of leadership, and Rebecca Harrington for her developing the programs and so generously, and our other panelist, Tom Williamson, co-chair of Earthkeepers. Are there any others who've come in, Mary?
David has joined us, and Dick, and Catherine Gardner. Welcome. And Amanda just joined us. Welcome, Amanda.
Because of the webinar format, it's our understanding that, at least for this evening's program, we who are presenters and panelists do the talking. There will be a poll available to you. We hope you will take, indicating whether you're interested in meeting again and having a different kind of Zoom where everybody can be in conversation. We on the panel like that idea. We want to know if you would be interested.
Welcome, Jacob Hansen. Okay.
Rebecca, we're going to start soon. Are you ready?
Yep. I think we were gonna start with an opening prayer
Yes.
from you. Okay.
Yes. Are all the rest of us, we're ready to go?
Yes.
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 Okay, on behalf of Christ United Methodist Church Earthkeepers, 11 of us trained and commissioned, and a circle of leaders that is approaching 30, and a mailing list of our church people pushing 70 to 80. This is our summer program, and I want you to know that our vision statement as a group of lay and clergy ministers is Earthkeepers protect God's creation. That's what we aspire to live into and as protectors of God's creation. Our mission statement is that Earthkeepers are disciples of Jesus Christ who caringly confront the crisis of climate change through political advocacy, role modeling, and education. We seek to improve human equity, restore ecosystems, and demonstrate ecological harmony. That's where we're coming from. That's what we aspire to with the help of the Holy Spirit. Let us pray. Precious, precious, precious God, immanent, as near to us as our easiest thoughts, and so much greatness in your outreach with love, in your creation with love, in your creating as love. And so we honor you this evening with this program. We thank you for the gift of our lives and our loves, and we seek your blessing on our being and on our doing. We pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay.
Are you handing off to me, Cooper?
I am right now.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to share some information about the vision for this webinar tonight, as I'm sure everyone has seen in the news over the last 3 to 4 months, there's been a lot of impacts on the climate and our immediate local as well as global environments from the pandemic, changes that have taken place in human behavior, from industrial to personal. And we really wanted to explore this further within our group, find out what's happened, what's changed for the world, us personally, and what changes we might take with us as we go forward after the pandemic is over, hopefully soon. And so we're going to start with a video that's about 17 minutes long. The video says inside of it that it's 30 minutes long, but we'll ignore that typo. Our total presentation might take up that much with introductions. So we'll go ahead and start the video. And just a reminder of what Cooper said, there will be a poll at the end to see if people would like to have a more lengthy discussion. We had envisioned this to be in the traditional format of the forums with 30 minutes of presentation and 30 minutes of open discussion, but we had limitations with the software and what it can do right now, the way we had it set up. So we hope to have that conversation later. So what we're going to do is watch the video. There's 2 questions at the end of the video that we have 2 panelists who are going to address, Eileen and Tom. They're going to answer those questions. And There's also a couple other questions within the video that we're not going to address tonight, but all of it's just designed to get you thinking about your experience as well as the world's experience during this time. And so please take the poll at the end if you'd like us to set up another meeting that is an open discussion so we can hear from all of you. All right, so Mary, I think we're ready to show the video.
Okay.
Mary, could you pause the video for a moment?
Yes.
I don't have any audio with the video.
Okay. All right.
I'm assuming that our attendees also do not have audio.
All right. Hold on just a minute. Apologize. I know there was something for that. I'm going to stop the share and try it again. Apologize. Aha. Okay.
What Nature is Teaching Us During the Pandemic. Third Wednesday Summer
Does that
Forum,
work?
July 15th, 2020. Christ United Methodist Church Earthkeepers. Earthkeepers protect God's creation. What Nature is Teaching Us During the Pandemic. Introduction. Many changes have occurred to us and our environment during the pandemic. We wish to examine these changes with the following concepts as a guide. Quote, "Those who live at Earth's farthest bounds are awed by your signs. You make the gateways of the morning and the evening shout for joy." Psalms chapter 65, verse 8. Quote, "The recognition of symbiosis as a major evolutionary force has profound philosophical implications. All larger organisms, including ourselves, are living testimonies to the fact that destructive practices do not work in the long run. In the end, the aggressors always destroy themselves, making way for others who know how to cooperate and get along. Life is much less a competitive struggle for survival than a triumph of cooperation and creativity. Indeed, since the creation of the first nucleated cells, evolution has proceeded through ever more intricate arrangements of cooperation and coevolution." End quote. Fritjof Capra. What Nature is Teaching Us During the Pandemic. Format. The format of this forum will be as follows. A 30-minute recorded presentation, followed by a 30-minute guided discussion time. Note, sources for information described in the presentation are visually shown, but are not narrated for brevity. Now, let's get started. What Nature is Teaching Us During the Pandemic. Overview. Many changes have occurred in many areas during the pandemic. For convenience, let's organize them into 3 categories. Environment. How has the pandemic impacted our environment? Wildlife behavior. How has the pandemic impacted how animals behave in both wild and developed settings? And human behavior. How has the pandemic affected how we interact with the environment? What Nature is Teaching Us During the Pandemic. Environment. How has the pandemic impacted our environment? What Nature is Teaching Us During the Pandemic. Environment. There have been many observed changes to the physical environment since the pandemic began. Just a sampling of those changes are described. Imagery and experts estimate that in China, the world's largest carbon emitter, emissions have decreased by 25%, due in large part to the abrupt halt of industrial manufacturing. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic: environment. The water in Venice also appeared much clearer due to boats no longer churning sediment to the top layers of the water. Air travel decreased, but it's important to note that, quote, air travel accounts for only 2.5% of global carbon dioxide emissions, a far smaller share than passenger cars or power plants, unquote. However, it is projected that by 2050, aviation could take up to 25% of the world's carbon budget. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic: environment. Quote, amid the gloom of the daily assault on society, referencing India, by the coronavirus and the lockdown against it, one silver lining along our collective clouds has been impossible to miss: the bright blue skies and cleaner air, unquote, writes Shashi Tharoor. Quote, research shows severe exposure to foul air inevitably means that most of us have gradually developed weaker respiratory systems. Eventually, the lockdown will be lifted, and we will have to kickstart the economy. But we should seize the opportunity to try and find a way to drive the economy forward without once again driving our air pollution levels through the roof. We must not lapse into inaction when the lockdown is lifted. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic: environment. Quote, the coronavirus crisis has become the ultimate accelerator, writes George Pagolatos. Quote, procedures that once inched along have suddenly adapted to the aggressive pace of the virus's spread. Like every leap in a technological adjustment, the initial transition is the hard part, and we're already over that. Teleworking will become an important collateral advantage of this terrible pandemic, just as the expanded use of plastic money and internet banking arose out of capital controls. The crisis is allowing underlying weaknesses to spin out of control, but it is also awaking reflexes for self-preservation, accelerating the decision-making process and prompting actions of collective emancipation. It is challenging delusions, complacency, and procrastination. It is revealing truths we refuse to see and giving rise to aspects of our collective selves that we never knew we had, unquote. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic: environment. Quote, carbon emissions are now surging back to pre-pandemic levels as states and countries reopen, a grim reminder that the world is still grappling with accelerating climate change, unquote. Quote, by mid-June, global emissions rebounded to roughly 5% below 2019 levels, and emissions in China returned to pre-pandemic levels, according to an update in a May study published in the journal Nature Climate Change, unquote. Quote, during lockdowns, vehicle traffic was cut in half in the US and Europe, but more people are getting back on the road and taking cars over public transportation, unquote. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic: environment. How do we know emissions are caused by changes in human behavior? Although the geologic record shows previous carbon dioxide spikes occurring before the industrial age, it's important to note that current levels are more than twice as high as any previously documented spikes. A chart is shown, the history of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Along the x-axis, it shows years before present day in thousands. Along the y-axis, it shows carbon dioxide levels, ppmv. The chart clearly demonstrates that levels are twice as high as previously documented spikes. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic: environment. How do we know emissions are caused by changes in human behavior? Quote, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide has increased dramatically from a pre-industrial era, ranging from AD 1000 to 1750, concentration of approximately 280 parts per million, ppm, to today's 400 ppm, close quote. Quote, scientists can tease apart how much carbon dioxide comes from natural sources and how much comes from combusted fossil fuel sources. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, environment. How do we know emissions are caused by changes in human behavior? Quote, compared to other carbon sources, carbon from fossil fuels has a distinctly different, quote, signature, unquote, essentially the relative amount of heavier or lighter atoms of carbon, technically delta 13C. The more negative the delta 13C, the higher the proportion of carbon from fossil fuels, unquote. Quote, over the years, delta 13C has decreased while the overall amount of carbon dioxide has increased. This information tells scientists that fossil fuel emissions are the largest contributor of carbon dioxide concentrations since the pre-industrial era. Quote, what nature is teaching us during the pandemic, environment summary. We have observed changes in the air, the water, the noise. Think on this. How has the pandemic affected how you interact with the environment? What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior. How has the pandemic impacted how animals behave in both wild and developed settings? What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior. Quote, wild animals are fearful of humans. Most animals have good reason to be terrified of people. A 2015 analysis reported that recreational and commercial hunters fell their quote-unquote prey at rates up to 14 times higher than those of non-human predators. Human prey even include apex predators such as cougars, which hunters kill around 9 times more frequently than non-human predators do. Some biologists have begun to call our species, quote, super predators, unquote. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior. In the reduced presence of humans, animals have ventured into developed spaces they normally avoid. 2 images are shown. The image on the left shows 2 deer walking along a paved street in a very developed urban area. The image on the right shows rams walking past closed shops along a public sidewalk in a smaller village. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior. 2 pandas in zoo captivity, who the zoo had been trying unsuccessfully for over a decade to mate, were finally able to get a little private time after the zoo closed due to the pandemic. They are now expecting. An image is shown of 2 pandas happily eating. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior. Quote, cities are also noisy places, and the noise affects how different species communicate with each other. Birds have to sing louder and at a higher pitch than their rural counterparts, which affects the perceived quality of their songs. With reduced traffic noise, we could see differences in how bats, birds, and other animals communicate, perhaps offering better mating opportunities, unquote. An image is shown of lions laying in a roadway. The photos were taken by Park Ranger Richard Sowery as he was patrolling the Kruger National Park on Wednesday, April 15th. Quote, normally they would be in the bushes because of the traffic, but they are very smart and now they are enjoying the freedom of the park without us, unquote, Sowery was quoted as saying by BBC. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior. Quote, 5 ways the coronavirus is affecting animals around the world. Poaching of endangered species is on the rise. Experts have called for a ban on the trade of wildlife. A tiger has a confirmed case of coronavirus in New York. Wildlife are roaming free while humans self-isolate. Millions of baby turtles are hatching on India's empty beaches, unquote. Ceasing the consumption of wildlife has been advised by experts to reduce risk of future outbreaks, but for individuals in some areas, the capture and sale of wildlife is their only way of staying above the poverty line. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, wildlife behavior summary. We have observed changes in the way animals behave in both natural and developed environments. Think on this. What changes have you observed? What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, human behavior. How has the pandemic affected how we interact with the environment? What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, human behavior. Some people are practicing social distancing while others are not. Some people find isolation tolerable while others do not. Some people are responding to the crisis with a sense of, quote, all of us, unquote, while others are responding with a self-protective response of, quote, us versus them, unquote. It is a difficult challenge to strike a balance between physiological and psychological health. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, human behavior. After years of trends towards reusable grocery bags and recycling, there has now been a, quote, tidal wave, unquote, of single-use plastics tossed into beaches and into public bodies of water. Thailand, which had banned disposable plastic bags at major stores in January and planned to slash plastic waste in 2020, now expects to see it rise by as much as 30%. Bangkok alone consumed 62% more plastic in April than it did 12 months earlier, most of it contaminated food packaging that isn't easily recycled, according to the Thailand Environment Institute. During an 8-week lockdown that eased June 1st, Singapore's 5.7 million residents generated an additional 1,470 tons of plastic waste from takeout packaging and food delivery alone, according to a survey. Discarded masks are often spotted on sidewalks, a once unimaginable sight in the prim city-state where littering carries hefty penalties. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, human behavior. An illustration of the difficulties in avoiding the heavy use of single-use plastics is detailed below in a health advisory from the European Centers for Disease Control. Quote, the recommendations regarding household waste management are the following. An individual waste bag should be placed in the patient's room. Paper tissues and face masks used by the patient should be immediately put in the waste bag that was placed in the patient's room. Gloves and face masks used by the caretaker and by the cleaner should be immediately put in a second waste bag placed near the door to the patient's room when the caretaker or cleaner leave. The waste bags should be closed before they are removed from the patient's room and replaced frequently. They should never be emptied in another bag. These waste bags can be collected together and placed in a clean general garbage bag. The closed patient waste bags can be put directly in the unsorted garbage. No special collection activity or other disposal method is necessary. After handling waste bags, strict hand hygiene should be performed. Use water and soap or alcohol-based hand disinfectants, unquote. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, human behavior summary. We have observed changes in the way we have behaved in the face of the extreme challenges the pandemic has posed. Think on this. What changes have you observed in yourself? What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, summary. As described, many changes have taken place in our environment, to us, to animals, and to the air and water we both use to survive. Now we'd like to hear how the pandemic has affected your relationship to the environment. What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, discussion questions. 1. What has changed for you about your relationship to the environment? 2. What changes will you bring forward after the pandemic is over? What nature is teaching us during the pandemic, conclusion. Thank you.
Are you ready to stop sharing your screen, Mary?
Yep.
Thank you. All right. What we're going to do now is we have these 2 questions that were posed at the end. Number 1, what has changed for you about your relationship to the environment? And 2, what changes will you bring forward after the pandemic is over? Eileen and Tom have both had some time to think about these questions. And so we're going to go over them to answer them. So the first one, what has changed for you about your relationship to the environment? Eileen.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm so impressed with what you put together for us and how thorough it is in raising the issues that we should be noticing in this pandemic time, and the information that is available if we're curious enough to look into what that all means. We all know that when major shifts or changes come, we are almost forced to see what we had used as our worldview before the crisis arises. Actually, history is one of those places where we go back to see what has happened in crisis times and what has been learned. And I think the real question for us is, in this pandemic, what can we learn? What is it that will help us have a better world, have a better earth, a more creative way of living together? But unfortunately, with human nature, most of us are not really happy about change. We don't want to accept the responsibility to look at it very thoroughly and to react to it. But this is such a major worldwide global change for us with the pandemic. I hope we can, all of us, take on the commitment to learn. There was another major period of history where there was huge change, and that was post-World War II. And one of the places that was having a crisis situation in their economy was Japan, which had been defeated. And so our State Department sent someone there to work with manufacturers to see if there could be a change in the way they had operated before, what their worldview was, so that they could come back and really make a difference in how the economy grew and prospered. His name was Edward Deming. Mm-hmm. And we know him from the quality improvement work that developed out of that, which we all became familiar with. I was always impressed with his work. And one of the things I really liked from it and have tried to use in my life is that he would say, as he gathered manufacturers together and they started to name how to do business and so forth, he would say, well, let's dangle our assumptions. Let's hang them up there and look at them and see what we believe. Well, of course, the minute you do this with any topic and people sit down and are willing to dangle their assumptions, you find out why we often talk past each other, because we're operating out of a very different viewpoint of what's possible or what is. So one of the things I would like to suggest is, can we, in our work in the environment, in climate change and all the things that are going, not only ask those around us and people that we are looking to for leadership, but our own assumptions that keep us from making the personal changes that would be very, very important if we want to change things in our society. An assumption is an unexamined belief that we think, without realizing it, that we think it. I'm going to repeat that. An assumption is an unexamined belief, what we think without realizing we think it. We act on it without testing its validity. In the debate about climate change, Rebecca has addressed quite profoundly, I think, the debate about whether climate change is caused by human activity or all of it is a cyclical event that has been going on for centuries and even millennium. But there's still so many people that use statements about, well, you know, it's not really getting warmer in Minnesota in the middle of winter, so climate change can't be real. it's always one major thing that we look at as truth without being willing to put the effort into it. And one of the things I'm hoping to do from this pandemic, and recognizing as I hear arguments and things that are presented, that I really want to say, let me take the time, let me be much more critical thinking happening in looking at what I'm saying and what I'm hearing, so that I'm not spouting things that are assumptions but are not credible. So I think if we could each think about that a bit, in terms, this is not only relevant in terms of the pandemic, but in terms of life in general, that we would see a greater improvement and a greater improvement in the discussions and conversations we take and how we cite sources. One of the things I really appreciated, Rebecca, is how you were putting in your program where you found the information and where others could find the information. And I know we're hoping to have this video available for people to, in the church, to have it available for people to download for viewing other times than tonight. So to sum up, what am I going to do as a result of this pandemic? Well, one of the things I'm going to do is try and be willing to check out, to question, to think more critically about what really makes a difference and what is the information and the statistics and the authorities that I should be listening to. Could this be any more important than in an election year, when we are choosing candidates and policymakers and let them get by without checking on what they are really saying about these this and other major issues? And so I would just encourage everyone to think about this. Dangle your assumptions, check out what you say you believe about something, and go make the effort to find out if that's good ground to stand on. And I think that would be a major factor in us making significant change, not only in the nation and the world, but in our individual lives. And when we come to the second question, I would like to talk about an example of that.
Great, Eileen, thank you. That was just a wonderful contribution and so educational to learn about Edward Deming. That's just fantastic. That's wonderful. Okay, now moving on to Tom. What has changed for you about your relationship to the environment?
Oh, can't hear you.
You're muted, Tom.
Now I'm not muted, correct?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. I guess a number of things that come to mind. And some of this, Eileen, you just said, you used the word assumptions, but I'm going to use the word need, okay? And the first and most important is realizing the need to drive is not a need at all. It's based on habit, momentum, and I define momentum as what we have always done. When we think we need to go to the store, we get in the car and we go. We don't need to go to the store, okay? We probably don't need to go to the store more than, well, we didn't need to go for quite a while. We had food delivered and other things. So, and driving is a huge carbon issue. So the need to drive, there was little need to drive for a while. The places I did go, we planned with specific lists of whatever we needed, the grocery store and all of that. And actually one of our cars, we were gone for 3 months at the beginning of the year, but I didn't put gas in the car until about like the end of June. So 6 months it went on 1 tank of gas. Granted, we weren't there for 3, but that's a long time. And I guess that's a relationship to the environment is stop driving. There was no buses to take, so that's kind of out of the question at this point. Once things began to open up, we're encouraged to support small businesses. And again, I use the word need again, the need for disposable utensils, masks, and everything else. So we were going the opposite direction as what I thought we should have been. Knowing the healthcare industry's increased the disposal problem significant, there's really little chance of that reversing in the near future. Disposal is going to be an environmental problem for years because the pandemic is just going to keep going. I don't know how to solve that personally or institutionally, I guess I'll say. Third, I run outside regularly. Now I make it a point to run in the woods. My athletic club membership, well, we ended it when we left and I've never rejoined, but I look at that again. Do I need to drive to the athletic club to exercise? The answer is no. So I probably won't ever rejoin. I've figured out another system that changes my relation to the environment. And lastly, I've been trying to clean out the house and realized how much stuff we really have. Early on, you couldn't get rid of it. So I just put it in the garage and looked at these piles of things that I've collected over the years and thought, you know, why do I need all this stuff? And don't buy any more stuff, because the negative impact of, you know, how do I'd really like to have it reused, recycled, go to Restore, go to Goodwill, but there are tons of things that are going into the garbage because I don't know how else to get rid of them. So those are kind of my four major relation to the environment. It's more on a personal basis than a global basis, but that's the changes I see. So that's it.
Thank you, Tom. That's great. And I think your point about want versus need matches up really perfectly with Eileen's point about challenging our assumptions. I know that's my grandfather, pardon me, my mother's father. He was always very, very focused on, do you want it or do you need it? And that was something he really lived by, because he had spent his adolescent years during the Great Depression, which had a lifelong impact on his choices about what he consumed and when and why. So I think that's really, really fantastic to always challenge, do I want this or do I need it? Okay, so moving on to the next question. What changes will you bring forward after the pandemic is over? Eileen?
Well, I'm building on what Tom has said. This is a frustration I think all of us have, is how to recycle, repurpose, or reuse. Finding, again, it's easy to have the assumption there's no place to send it except the dump. And so I would suggest that one of the things we as Earthkeepers have tried to do with some of our information that we've circulated in the church is to show that there are places things can go, especially with our church, the thrift on Fifth. We're doing a good job in repurposing clothes, and many people are getting advantage of that. But anyway, as I thought about this thing of finding new ways to operate and checking what our assumptions are, I was thinking about your part of the presentation on plastic. And so I thought I'd give you an example about an assumption. And then you said one of your quotes was from Thailand, and how they had been making a real effort to curb plastic. And then when they didn't want to use cloth bags or whatever, they went back to plastic bags, and how this is, again, impacted the environment. Certainly we can see human activity there, if not nowhere else, is how we use products and how we decide we have to have them and so forth, as Tom is saying. I'd like to give the example, though, of how an assumption can be broken with this kind of investigation and desire to make a difference. And I'm bringing this to you as an example from Charterhouse, where I live, which is a group retirement home. And since the pandemic came, of course, we have all been living very independently. We're in our apartments or rooms all the time. We don't have any group gatherings. That means we don't have any group meals or anything like that. So everything has had to be delivered to our doors, and it's been in plastic containers. And of course, some plastic containers can be recycled. So they've, over the time, Charterhouse has really looked for those kinds of plastics, but still a huge amount of them couldn't be. And so there was, and I think this is a good point to make, there was a very definite group of people in Charterhouse who started to say, can't we find a different way so we are not wasting so much plastic and putting it into the waste? And now Charterhouse is a business. It has to look at its bottom line. It has to think about cost. One assumption would be, one, well, there's no product out there that will work for us. Another assumption could be, well, it's going to cost too much. You know, we can go on these assumptions, and if you're not willing to check into it, if you're not really serious about it, it's easy to stop and say, well, I tried, but there's nothing there. Well, Charterhouse did seriously take it on, and so we have come to the point where we have an entirely different product brought to our door for our food. And I'm going to try and hold it up so you can see it, but it is completely reusable. Now, to have a reusable plastic means that they had to buy a new dishwasher, a different type of dishwasher, and they had to buy a new kind of dryer so that they can leave them out to dry, air dry. Well, that's a big expense for Charterhouse, you see. I mean, there is no question that this is more expensive for them in the short run. But in the long run, it's much less expensive because it's reusable and it's not going into waste, which has to be paid for to be taken away. So I just use that as another example of how we can maybe individually think more critically about what we assume can and cannot be done in order to give Earth care. Another assumption that's widespread out there, if you talk to people, is, well, but my actions won't really make a difference. I mean, I'm only one person, and this is a global problem. What difference does it make? Well, I think Tom has illustrated it in driving, but this is a very dangerous assumption, because it's only when a critical mass of people in any situation take hold of a problem and start to deal with it in their own lives and make a difference that we really have improvement. So I want to encourage us to find energy, to find purpose, to find time to really think carefully about our choices and about our shopping and about our use, and encourage the organizations we belong to, the family we belong to do the same. And I would stop with that as one way that I hope to be more effective in the response to the pandemic.
That's great. Thank you, Eileen. And just to echo on your point about thinking about what goes to the dump, I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding that the Earth is basically a closed system, and that things that go to the dump are maybe going away from our individual house, but they're not actually going anywhere. they break down, and there's a big issue right now with microplastics floating in the air because they get broken down into very small particles and we actually inhale them. And also in our water systems, because our water treatment is not designed to filter out microscopic pieces of plastic. It's designed to kill bacteria and viruses so we don't get foodborne illness from our drinking water, but we are consuming it. And so those plastics aren't going anywhere. They're not floating off into the sun, although shooting garbage into the sun was suggested decades ago as a possibility. But for now, they're here. They're here, we're consuming them, and we have no idea what the effects are going to be. So even if you're not motivated by, you know, let's keep the earth healthy in general, just a motivation for your own personal health will want to make you think twice about what you're producing and what you're encouraging production facilities to give to you to consume. All right, now, Tom, moving on to you. What changes will you bring forward after the pandemic is over?
Well, I think first of all, since I come from a power industry background, I am far more concerned about carbon dioxide than I am about most everything else. Now, I'm not saying the other things aren't an issue, because they certainly are. But to me, the carbon dioxide is the biggest issue. So going forward, I think it's going to be look at the driving even more so. And like I said earlier, just get rid of the athletic club membership, because that's 8 miles of driving at least 5 days a week that I don't need to do. So, you know, that's, and other things to reduce the number of trips. On the downside of that is I'm kind of an old guy. I am a bicyclist, but I don't see myself biking downtown to go to meetings. There's some issues with getting run over, for one, because I will never heal up if I do. So, and now the public transportation system is kind of disappeared also. So those are issues. So that makes it even more important to think about the driving bit, so that there's less emissions from driving. Second thing to bring forward after this, they don't say this a tremendous amount, but occasionally they do. I'd really like to increase the plant-based eating. Get away from meat, because meat uses so much water. Now the issues with the people having to work in those places, there's just, it's better for the environment to eat less meat. Okay, so I think the issue there is other family members aren't so much into that, and it's, you know, if you go out to eat, I can eat a vegetarian dish, and, you know, Karen can eat something else, and that's fine. When we're here together, it's more difficult to do than I think it's more difficult to do than it has been. But look, going forward, that's what I'd like to do. And lastly, when the pandemic is over, and I started this earlier, part of Earthkeepers and everything else is hopefully increase the activist activities politically and otherwise to make the point to the politicians and those people, because that's where the changes get made. The one thing that I'm finding that kind of occurred to me while I was running the other day is the issues people have with masks and not wearing masks. Okay, if you think about where, and this is, I don't know that this is opinion, this may be fact, but whatever it is, I'm saying it. So, you know, if you can't get people to wear masks to help other people that are related to them, then that they can see, how do we get climate change across to people to make changes in their life for people that are yet to be born, or what, you know, future generations, years and years from now. You know, if people aren't willing to put a mask on to help their neighbor or the old guy next door to not get sick, how do we need to make a lot bigger effort in trying to get the point across that the whole climate issue is real and what's going to happen. I don't know how to do that, but it's a much bigger problem, or it's a much bigger problem than I thought it was. So we'll leave it at that. But to continue to do the things and go to the meetings and try to convince the political people that make the rules and the laws to take the environment seriously, I'll call it. So that's about it. So
That's great. Thank you, Tom. And I think your point is really important about the sense of interconnectedness between all humans, between humans and animal life, between humans and the environment. And we're seeing a lot of that tested, whether people thoroughly understand that and thoroughly feel that. The interconnectedness, of course, is there, whether or not people are acknowledging it.
Right.
So that's the catch. The science is constant, even though the beliefs may shift around it. So it's certainly something we have to work around and think about. And certainly I think ways, if we can focus on connecting more meaningfully with people in our community, finding ways to do that during this time when we can't communicate in person as much, really helps to build that interconnectedness. But we are in many ways living in a very severed time, which I think may have led to a lot of these choices people are making. And hopefully this time of crisis can bring us together.
yes, absolutely.
Amen.
All right, I think we are ready to pass our speaking role over to Cooper so he can do some closure for us and end us with a closing prayer.
Becca, thank you so much for your leadership. Eileen, Tom, Mary, and all who are here. Imagine with me, will you, for a moment, the lobby of our church. We're elbow to elbow at circular tables enjoying a church meal. And we're laughing and we're poking elbows and we're shaking hands, and some are embracing and some, oh my, perhaps are kissing in friendship as followers of Christ, Christ United Methodist Church, devoted to a fulsome life in God's love and justice, and inclusive of Mother Nature and God's creation. So here we are, and we pause for prayer out of such a rich experience together of gratitude. That day will come, but that day is right now for this prayer. Are you with me?
Yes.
From the UN Environmental Sabbath Program, this prayer. We join with the earth and with each other to bring new life to the land, to restore the waters, to refresh the air. We join with the earth and with each other to renew the forests, to care for the plants, to protect the creatures. We join with the earth and with each other to celebrate the seas, to rejoice in the sunlight, to sing the song of the stars. We join with the earth and with each other to recreate the human community as promoting justice and peace, and to remember our children. We join with the earth and with each other. We join together as many and diverse expressions of one loving mystery for the healing of the earth and the renewal of all life. In this vision and in this prayer we leave. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Thank you so much, Cooper. That was beautiful. Just a reminder to everyone, if you'd like to have a larger, more open-flowing discussion between lots of people about this, please fill out the poll so we know you're interested, so we can set that up. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.